Welcome in. We are diving straight into something today that really gets right at the core of how we interact with the world around us.
hmm
Think about those fleeting encounters you have on a city street.
Yeah, or a random exchange in a hallway, right?
Exactly, those moments where you lock eyes with a stranger, the world sort of tilts on its axis for a fraction of a second, and you walk away just unable to stop replaying the interaction.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Today's deep dive is a profound look at the boundaries of human connection, the hard limits of our own agency, and the massive chasm between knowing how a moment feels and actually understanding what it means.
And we're pulling all of this from a remarkably raw, um, deeply philosophical essay called Turning Around.
Great.
It was posted on February 17th, 2025, on a blog called The Wrong Font by a writer named R.M. Goslin. And it's a fascinating piece because it takes three entirely distinct threads.
Which you wouldn't go together at all.
No, not at all. It takes a gritty street encounter in Boston, a hauntingly quiet moment inside a prison classroom, and then a total reinterpretation of an ancient Greek myth.
Yeah.
And it weaves them together to really challenge everything you probably assume about why we try to, quote unquote, save people.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the way Gosselin sets the stage here is incredibly immersive. We start with the narrator taking a summer trip to Boston.
Right.
He's got some time to kill, spends a few uneventful hours in Harvard Square, but then he gets on the Red Line subway, and on a complete whim, he decides to jump off at Central Square.
Which is such a deliberate shift.
It is. He's stepping out of his current life and deliberately walking back into his own past. He used to work a couple of jobs there, used to spend a lot of time in the nightlife scene. He's essentially chasing a ghost of his former self just to see what the atmosphere feels like now.
Which is a very specific psychological state to put yourself in, isn't it?
Def
When you revisit an old haunt without a clear agenda, your senses are just wide open. And the author describes the atmosphere of Central Square that day as absolutely electric.
Mm.
He actually brings in this brilliant concept from the philosopher William James.
Oh, the buzzing confusion one.
Yes, James coined the phrase, the blooming buzzing confusion.
Let's actually pause on that because it's such a visceral phrase. William James originally used that to describe how a baby first experiences the world, right?
That's exactly right.
Before our brains learn to filter out the noise, categorize the sights, and ignore the background chatter, it's just raw, unfiltered data hitting you all at once.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever stepped out of a quiet subway station right into the blinding lights and deafening noise of a major city intersection, you know exactly what that buzzing confusion feels like. Your brain simply can't process it all.
And instead of retreating from that sensory overload, the narrator leans right into it.
He embraces it.
He does. He feels what he describes as a sacred danger in the air. He senses a presence, and he actually capitalizes that P in the text, hovering just behind the surface of things, waiting to reveal its face. He's entirely at home in this chaos. He just starts walking.
Which feels like an open invitation to the universe. And the universe answers immediately. Out of nowhere, a woman is standing right in front of him.
Literally out of nowhere.
Yeah, the text says she was on him before he even knew what was happening, almost as if she had just materialized and risen straight up from the subway grate.
Wow.
And the visual we get of her is stark. I mean, there is zero romanticization here. She's in her mid-20s, shoeless, emaciated. She has scruffy blonde hair, and her arms and face are spotted with small red stabs.
It paints such a clear, harsh picture. And she asks a question that anyone who spends time in a city has heard 1,000 times. She says, "Do you have any money so I can feed my kids?"
Right.
And the narrator, he doesn't hesitate. He pulls out the few dollar bills he has in his wallet and puts them straight into her outstretched hand. The money instantly vanishes.
But he doesn't stop there. Because giving a couple of dollars is a transaction. It's easy. Is what we do to politely end an uncomfortable interaction.
Exactly. It's the quick exit.
But the narrator decides to go the extra mile. He recognizes her immediate physical need beyond just the cash. He tracks down a nearby convenience store, walks in, and buys a pre-wrapped sandwich, a bottle of water, and a small bag of potato chips, and then brings them back to her on the street.
Let's look at the psychology of that escalation for a second.
Yeah, let's do that.
Providing actual sustenance requires a totally different level of engagement. You're acknowledging someone's humanity and their bodily needs. But this is exactly where the boundary of this interaction gets violently pushed.
Yeah, the pushback.
He delivers the food, fully expecting the quiet satisfaction of a good deed completed. Instead, she looks at him and says, Do you have any money so I can get a bus ticket back to Rhode Island?
He tells her the truth. He says, I just gave you all my cash a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
But she presses harder. She asks, can you go to an ATM?
That's a huge leap.
It is, and this is the hard line for him. He gives a firm, unequivocal refusal. No, I'm not going to an ATM. He turns around and starts walking away. He has established his limit. The boundary is drawn.
But as he's walking away, he hears her call out behind him. Hey, wait a minute.
Think about the last time you walked past someone asking for help on the street. You've almost certainly had that exact same internal monologue playing in your head. The narrator is just chanting to himself, don't turn around, you've done enough, don't turn around.
It's the universal urban mantra.
It really is. We build these invisible walls to protect ourselves because the sheer volume of need in the world is paralyzing.
We fear that if we turn back, more will be demanded of us. The boundary we just exhausted ourselves setting will be trampled. But despite that intense internal chant, he completely subverts his own rule. He turns around.
He does.
And she's walking toward him, closing the distance between them, and her arm is outstretched once again.
What's fascinating here is,
Her hand.
yes, only this time her palm is facing down. I think that is one of the most arresting details in the entire piece. She's not asking for the ATM. She's not asking for more money. She just says, hey there, what's your name?
Such a shift.
He answers, Michael. And she replies, my name's C. It was very nice to have met you.
Just a name. Just a fundamental acknowledgement of existence between two human beings standing in the middle of that blooming, buzzing confusion. They briefly shake hands.
And the final image of this encounter in Boston is so deeply haunting. After this incredibly profound moment of social grace and sheer humanity, she turns away.
Yeah.
She sinks down onto a nearby bench, and she starts aggressively tearing open that small bag of potato chips with her teeth. You have this polite, almost formal introduction slamming right up against the raw, desperate, animalistic reality of survival.
It's a visceral visual to end on. And right as the reader is processing that image, the author radically shifts the structure of the essay. The reality of the narrative completely drops out from under us.
We realize we're not where we thought we were.
Exactly. We suddenly realize the narrator isn't just recounting the story to us on the page. He is physically standing in a room telling this exact story aloud to his students.
But it's not a leafy college campus. It is a stark, bare room inside a prison. The author grounds us in this new environment with incredibly specific, jarring details. He describes the students sitting in front of him wearing dingy green uniforms and brand new sneakers.
That contrast again.
The narrator mentions he doesn't even know why he decided to tell that particular story to these particular men on that given night. He just assumes they might inherently understand the dynamic of the woman on the street, given their own circumstances.
Which is when one of the students speaks up. And Gosselin identifies this student with such a brilliant, humanizing detail. Is the student who always writes, God bless, at the end of his academic papers.
That part really got me.
Think about the relentless, stubborn optimism it takes to write God bless on your homework while serving time in a prison. That specific student looks up at the professor and asks, what do you think you learned from that?
It's a startling question. The narrator points out how rare it is for a student to ask a teacher what the teacher learned. It completely inverts the power dynamic of the classroom.
Right.
And it forces a massive epiphany for the narrator. He realizes he doesn't actually have an answer. He knew exactly how the encounter in Boston felt. He felt the tension, the empathy, the frustration, the relief. But he had never stopped to think about what the encounter actually meant.
That distinction between feeling and meaning is the philosophical engine of this entire deep dive. Knowing how a moment makes your stomach drop is biological. Understanding the meaning behind your own actions requires a level of self-interrogation most of us actively avoid.
We really do.
And being asked that question in the middle of a prison triggers a visceral flashback for the narrator. It pulls him back to a much earlier time at that very same facility.
If we connect this to the bigger picture...
Oh, well, let me jump in there.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really frames his whole journey.
Yeah. He starts remembering the early days of this prison college program. He describes it as incredibly shaky, unsure, a thing of shreds and patches. It was entirely reliant on private donations and whatever discarded educational materials they could scrounge up.
They were barely holding it together.
Constantly operating on the edge of collapse. They never knew if the program would survive another month.
He recalls one specific night during a period when the funding really seemed to have dried up permanently. The money was gone. There was this heavy, unspoken reality hanging over the room that this was likely the last class they would ever have together.
That had to be crushing.
The mood is suffocating. The class finishes, and the narrator is walking away, heading up the long hallway for what he assumes is the final time. Then he hears a voice call out from behind him. "Have a nice night, Professor. Drive safe."
Now, to fully grasp the weight of that, you have to understand the environment. The narrator explains a strict, non-negotiable rule he had to learn when he started teaching there. College begins and ends at the classroom doorway.
Very strict boundary.
Absolutely no interaction with the students once you step out of that room. It's a boundary imposed by the carceral system. Inside the room, they are students, and he is a professor. The second they cross the threshold into the hallway, they are inmates, and he is a civilian.
But under the crushing weight of that particular night, believing he'll never see these men again, he breaks the rule. He hears the voice, and just like he did with the woman in Boston. Wait, no, just like he did before he turns around.
And what he sees is devastating. He turns and sees his students standing completely motionless along the wall, lined up in a double column. They are being guarded by 2 corrections officers brandishing nightsticks.
It's a brutal reality check.
An instantaneous snapback to reality. The polite, mundane farewell of drive safe is entirely eclipsed by the threat of state violence and total physical control.
But in that tiny fraction of a second, the narrator makes eye contact with one of the students standing in the front of the column, and the student gives him what the narrator calls a mere flicker of the hand.
A flicker.
A tiny, almost imperceptible wave. A microscopic gesture of connection defying the absolute rigidity of the hallway. And then the professor turns a corner, and in his own words, the students were swallowed up by the prison.
Swallowed up?
It perfectly captures the total consumption of their agency by the system. The narrator says that specific image of the double column and the flickering hand has never left him. So we're presented with these 2 distinct moments of turning around.
Right.
Turning back to see on the street in Boston and turning back to the incarcerated students in the hallway.
And to bridge these 2 memories, the essay takes a brilliant turn into literature and mythology. It brings in a haunting quote from Margaret Atwood's poem Eurytus.
Oh, this quote is incredible.
It is. The quote is directed at the person desperately trying to do the rescuing. It says, "Oh, handful of gauze, little bandage, handful of cold air, it is not through him you will get your freedom." Atwood is pulling from the classic Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. As a quick refresher for you listening, Orpheus was the greatest musician in the world. When his beloved Eurydice died, his grief was so absolute that he traveled down into the underworld itself. His music was so beautiful that the gods of the underworld granted him permission to lead her back up to the world of the living.
But there was one condition.
Always a catch.
Always. He had to walk in front, and he was strictly forbidden from looking back at her until they reached the surface. But right at the end, just as they were nearing the light of the living world, he doubted. He turned around. And because he broke the rule, he watched her get pulled back into the darkness forever.
Traditionally, we're taught to read that as a tragic story about a lack of faith, or how a single failure of patience causes a terrible loss.
But this raises an important question, and it is the absolute crux of the essay. What if we have been misinterpreting the myth of Orpheus this entire time?
I love how Gosselin reframes this.
The new perspective he offers is devastatingly clear. What if turning around did not actually cause Orpheus to lose Eurydice? Because realistically, did Orpheus ever possess that kind of agency to begin with?
Could a living man truly conquer the finality of death just by keeping his eyes facing forward?
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? The essay argues that the act of turning around didn't condemn her. Instead, turning around forced Orpheus to face a heartbreaking truth he was desperately trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And that truth is, she may have been his song, she may have been his inspiration and his great love, but she was never his to save.
The parallels are undeniably striking. The narrator suddenly realizes he is playing the role of Orpheus in both of his own stories.
Right.
He wanted to save C in Boston. He gave her his cash. He bought her a meal. He shook her hand. But he could not save her from the streets or from whatever systemic failures or personal tragedies placed her on that subway grate. She was not his to save.
And he desperately wanted to save his students. He brought education into a dark place, he offered intellectual connection and treated them as scholars, but at the end of the night, they were swallowed up by the prison.
Yeah.
He could not walk them out the door and into the free world with him. They were not his to save.
Which brings us right back to that bare classroom, back to the student who signs his papers, God bless, waiting patiently for an answer to his question. What do you think you learned from that?
The narrator snaps out of his internal realization and he finally answers the student. He says, I guess the lesson would be, don't turn around.
Because turning around means looking directly at the suffering you cannot fix. It means facing the crushing reality of your own powerlessness. But the student offers this deeply empathetic, beautifully simple counterpoint. He just replies, maybe she was just lonely.
Maybe she was just lonely. That one sentence completely recontextualizes the entire Boston encounter.
It really does.
She wasn't asking him to be her savior. She wasn't asking him to pull her out of her underworld. She just wanted him to know her name. And the narrator agrees. He says, yes, that must have been it.
The piece closes by referencing a classic painting, Orpheus Playing to the Animals by Benedetto Gennari. It's a silent, lingering image of the master singer, sitting completely alone, playing his music for the beasts of the field because the person he loved is gone.
It's a heavy image.
It's a portrait of a man who has finally accepted that he cannot alter fate. He is simply bearing witness to his loss through his song.
For you listening, this brings up so much about how we operate in society. Think about your own life. Think about how often you encounter systemic struggles.
Right.
Maybe it's the homelessness you see on your daily commute, or a friend who is trapped in a deeply destructive cycle, or just the overwhelming global tragedies you see on the news every night. How often do you feel that crushing weight of wanting to swoop in and save someone, only to hit the concrete wall of your own limitations?
It's human nature to want to be the hero. We want to believe that our sheer will, our compassion, or our resources can pull someone out of their personal underworld. But this text asks us to sit with the extreme discomfort of knowing that we often cannot.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We've spent a lot of time talking about the rule don't turn around and how breaking that rule forces us to accept that we cannot rescue people. But if turning around forces us to accept our own powerlessness, does the unwritten rule of don't turn around actually exist to protect them from the false hope of being saved?
Oh, that's a brilliant question.
Or does that rule exist entirely to protect us from the grief of our own limitations? If we don't have the power to save someone from their underworld, is the mere act of turning around the act of looking them in the eyes, shaking their hand, and bearing witness to their existence a vital form of salvation in itself?
It's a heavy question to carry with you the next time you hear a voice call out from behind you on a crowded street.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.